Hey guys, this video is going to be a pretty short one. I'm just going to introduce to you some of the causes of the French Revolution. To do that, I have to talk to you about inflation. Inflation is when prices go up. I'm sure you've experienced inflation before. Think of something, I don't know, I'm American, so I'm going to say a Coca-Cola. I used to be able to go into the store and buy a Coca-Cola for $1. And then suddenly one day I went into the store to buy a Coca-Cola and it was $1.25. The same Coca-Cola. I wasn't getting a bigger bottle. It wasn't a new fancy recipe. It wasn't extra cold. The exact same thing. It's suddenly more expensive. That's inflation. I'm sure it's happened to you. Something that you regularly buy just suddenly one day was more expensive. That's inflation. So, inflation was happening in France. But let's go back. Let's go back to my little story, Coca-Cola. So let's say I am a millionaire. Does that difference between $1 and $1.25, does that really make a difference to me? No, not at all. But what if I were really, really poor? If I were really poor, then the raising of that price would make a difference. It would make a difference to whether I could actually buy that Coke or not buy that Coke. So the differences in changes in the price of things affect you, what your social class is, differently. The upper classes don't necessarily notice a change. Like, it's 1/4. A rich person might not even notice, but a poor person would really, really notice. So in France, we're talking the late 1700s. Late 1700s. There was a big famine. There's a big famine in France, and that means that their crops failed. Like, they were growing wheat. This is my poor, actually, you know what, it's not really that bad. It kind of looks like wheat. This is my wheat. They were growing it, but it didn't work out. So, like, there was no wheat. And it takes wheat to make bread. So if you have a basic economics, this is your lesson in economics for the day. If you have a lot of wheat, then bread is really cheap because you have lots of wheat, and so your bread is cheap. If you only have a little wheat, it suddenly becomes really valuable and it becomes very expensive. Well, the vast majority of people in France were very, very poor. Very poor. And the only thing, they lived on bread. They lived on bread. I mean, it's pretty much the only thing they could afford to buy. They were poor, they were unhealthy because all they were eating was bread all the time, but that was all they could afford. And when the crops failed, the price of bread started going up. And what do the rich people do when the price of bread goes up? They don't even notice. Like, okay, whatever, the price of bread has gone up, I don't care. But for the poor people, it's really, really bad Like, people were watching their own children starve to death. People themselves were on the verge of starvation because there was no bread. There's a very, very famous quote of Marie Antoinette. She was the wife of King Louis the 16th. Marie, no, it's not Mary. Sorry, it's Marie. Marie Antoinette, the wife, so she was the queen, wife of King Louis the 16th. And there's this thing attributed to her. I need you to understand there is no historical proof that she actually said this. So I'm not teaching this to you as fact. Marie Antoinette said this. I'm teaching it to you as it is something that is attributed to her. Just people say. It's like a rumor. Marie Antoinette said this. She said, "Let them eat cake." Let them eat cake. And this is because think of how really, really, really rich the Queen of France is. Do you think that the rising cost of bread had any effect on Marie Antoinette's life at all? No, it didn't. She didn't care. She probably didn't even know that the price of bread was going up because it didn't matter to her. But there were riots in the streets. There were things called bread riots. People were actually like fighting and rioting in the street because they were broke and hungry and their children were dying. And Marie Antoinette's response to that was, "Let them eat cake." And it's showing this complete disconnect, like a misunderstanding how the queen of a nation is so far removed from her people that she doesn't even understand what they're upset about. She says, "Oh, well, okay, they can't buy bread. Tell them to buy cake." Well, if they can't buy bread, do you think they can buy cake? No. So once again, Marie Antoinette, there is no real, true, historic fact that Marie Antoinette said this. It is not fact. But it is something, like you'll see it in movies. You'll see it in memes. Lots of times you'll see a picture of Marie Antoinette and it says, "Let them eat cake." Anytime, have you ever been talking to someone that was just so much richer than you, had so much more money than you, that they couldn't really, there were some things that you just couldn't talk about. Like, they just didn't understand. Like, you said something like, I don't know, I had to save money to buy a phone because my parents said they'd pay half, but I had to pay half. And that other person was like, "Huh? Your parents don't just buy you everything?" Or any kind of a conversation like that, when someone is just so wealthy that they don't even understand what you're saying about money. Well, that's Marie Antoinette. She was the Queen of France, and all she did was have these high-class social parties all the time where she spent she probably gave the dog more food than most people had to feed their entire family in a week. And when they were rioting in the streets about not having money for bread, she was like, oh, let them eat cake. So that's setting up the French Revolution. There were these very, very, very rich people that none of this financial stuff really mattered to them. They're like, I don't care if bread is a little bit more expensive. And then you had all the masses of just your everyday people that couldn't even afford to buy bread because the price was getting so expensive. And so there were real tensions on the street. People were just angry all the time. And in the next video, I will tell you what happened after that.